Good evening. It's a delight to see you all, to be here. Thank you for these very warm introductions. Lori, thanks so much for your leadership in organizing this wonderful event, Women, Well-Being, the World. Wow. These words make my heart sing. And Wisconsin. And and Wisconsin is making my heart sing even now. So we're off to a great start. Jean, thank you for the introductions, for your wonderful team that has helped to facilitate this event and to bring Artworks for Freedom's work here, and for just being a pal through so very, very much. We definitely are part of the Girlfriends Association of War in the Trenches when we were both going out and doing wild and woolly field work. And so it's very dear to continue our friendship in many different capacities. And I love the work that is happening. It's great to be back after almost a year since the summit last July and see how the initiative has gathered steam. I'm delighted to share the podium with Peter Greenberg. Peter is someone who was in the middle of the stories that we're going to be talking about, and it was good journalism, actually, in 1998 that contributed to propelling the story of human trafficking into the public eye. Prior to that, it was being investigated by government officials, a lot of grassroots organizations that people didn't know about. The UN was hemming and hawing and chewing on it, as were advocates in different countries. I heard that last. And but in 1998, in January, Peter Spector, who worked for the New York Times, wrote an article entitled Contraband Women, Trafficking and New Cargo. It was about the trafficking of women from the former Soviet Union caught up in the mass exodus to Israel, and what were a couple of thousand illegally smuggled women when there were tens of thousands, 15, 20,000 coming into the small ports and airports in Israel. He broke the story, and so this enabled the public, the grassroots, the you, the me, the us of the world to step in and say, wow, this is what's happening. Now we know, now we get the story, we will go about it. And they, combined with the efforts, the grassroots movements, combined with the initiatives of the government organizations and the international organizations, contributed to the introduction in the UN of the trafficking victim protocol in 2000, and importantly for us, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which was signed into law by President Clinton on October 28th, 2000. So the power of the media, the people like you who tell the stories, is essential and forms part and parcel of what it is that we do and what it is that we're talking about. Over the next few days at this summit, we're going to be talking about a lot of forms of exploitation and violence against women. And we're also going to be examining some of the best practices that have been documented to address these. But all the good practices in the world are not going to matter if we don't get the messaging right. We can't just sit around and talk about our practices without making sure that we're communicating these to the world at large. Why? Well, ending trafficking is not really as clear-cut as ending a crime like speeding or drunk driving or theft. I know what's mine. I know if someone takes it, you took it, it's wrong. The lines are very clear. But the nature in human trafficking, the nature of the trafficked person, the complex causes that create the vulnerabilities, the dynamic, convoluted, multi-continental nature of the crime, as Peter has spent so much time investigating, are deeply involved in the way we look at the world, in very basic things. For example, the way we look at men's and women's roles, the way we look at sex, how we feel about prostitution. What about immigration? My gosh, has there ever been a litany of more complex factors that contribute to creating the filters through which we look at trafficking? So we're not being asked, when we talk about the war against trafficking, eliminating trafficking in persons, we're not being asked to merely stop a crime. In many instances, we are being asked to fundamentally change the way we look at the world. When it comes to bringing about social change, the push actually comes from us, not legislators. They get on the bandwagon afterwards. The push comes from us, the taxpayers, the fist pounders, the advocates, the jury members, the community leaders, and the voters. Legislators take their cues from us on matters of social change, and not the other way around. The anti-trafficking movement, way in the middle of the 1990s, got its start as a result of concerted grassroots efforts that included individuals from the far right and the far left and everybody in between. You had the National Association of Evangelicals and you had the National Organization of Women, and in the Senate you had Senator Sam Brownback and you had Senator Paul Wellstone. You could not have had a more diverse group of people on the ground and in the political realm, and yet they got together and they passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Since that time, the role of private advocacy groups, the role of individuals has only continued. For example, just recently, I was on this conference call, a coalition of several hundred groups, individuals, nonprofit organizations in the anti-trafficking world, those who believe that they have a place, united in a coalition that they have called Generation Freedom. All right, and the mandate of Generation Freedom is very, very specific. Its immediate mandate is to challenge each presidential candidate to put trafficking on their platform. All right, it's a beautiful goal because it's finite, it's specific, and you know if it's going to be done or not. Either somebody is going to take the call and say, yes, we will put that on our platform, talk to the policy director or not. And all but one have agreed to do so. All right? This is not a... leave you guessing. He's our favorite. Not. No, it's the Trump campaign did not engage in conversation with the Generation Freedom Foundation coalition. So citizen power, people power, is critical to these efforts. People just like you and me. We give money, we serve on juries, we vote for local, state, national leaders, and we approve budgets. People just like you and me call in tips because we can recognize a trafficked person in our neighborhood. People just like us can be part of the solution. So if we have so much power, isn't it necessary to take a few minutes and reflect, where are we getting our information from? We have a lot of power. What fuels that power? And that's what we are going to be talking about this evening. The information that you will get that helps you make the decision to influence your surroundings to end human trafficking. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the organization I have the honor of working with, Artworks for Freedom. Artworks for Freedom believes in the power of the arts to challenge the way all of us view the world. The arts can bring a message. They can challenge stereotypes. They affect our core beliefs in ways that articles and books and academic seminars and good classes can't. We believe in the power of all of the arts, first, to raise awareness and deepen understanding about human trafficking. But we believe that you can't just stop there. So what if you know a lot? Well, we have to give ourselves into a process where we allow this knowledge and this information to transform us, to get into our very souls and start doing this thing of changing the way we view the world, which I talked about just a few minutes ago, and to begin empowering us to go out and do something. We believe at Artworks for Freedom that every person can go out and do something. We're working on a project now that we're calling A Little Book of Big Heroes, where men and women and teenagers and young people who are not full-time in this work, who have families and children and other cares, have done perhaps one thing. One of my recent students got her first job after taking a class I teach at human trafficking at a university in Washington, D.C., and introduced the concept into the organization, a large national organization, which has now taken it on as part of its platform. Right, a young student, a recent graduate, had the ability to impact a national organization. Another young student got a job at a law firm, got her company for the first time to take on a human trafficking pro bono case. One student had influence to do that. A young mom I know has 3 small children at home. She's on the board of a foundation, is able to raise money, is able to visit, is able to serve, is able to contribute in a major way to the way Haitian children are viewed in the rest of children. Child labor is viewed in Haiti. Young mom doing one thing. We believe this at Artworks for Freedom, and we believe that the art can help you to do it. So I hope that you are able in the next few days, or perhaps some of you have seen it, to see the art that's in front of Chazen. Am I pronouncing it correct? The museum here. This is the beautiful photography by Kay Chernush, who's the founder of Artworks for Freedom and the artistic director, in which she is creating a new way of seeing, a new way of looking at the stories in a way that doesn't re-victimize the victim, that honors the dignity of survivors, that tells the real story. So please, when in the day to come, on these beautiful sunny days, take a few minutes and reflect on what you see and imagine what they have to say about the world we live in. All right, so I'm around. I have information about our organization. I'd love for you to go to our website, sign up for our mailing list, like us on Facebook. I have cards. We like friends. How can we help you? You know, I have to do that. I'm the executive director. You know, this is my job, but it's also my pleasure. All right, here we go. This is a quote I have always found very compelling. Some of you may have heard of, may be familiar with Walker Percy. He's a 20th century Southern author. And he said, "Bad books always lie." All right, that was riveted me. You know, first of all, you have to decide what is a bad book and what is a good book. And that's a little bit outside of the scope of my lecture, but it's always fun to think about. But basically he said bad books lie because they lie about the human condition. They don't tell the truth about who people really are. I take this to mean that they cheat. They cheat the telling of our stories by creating outcomes that correspond to the aims of the writer and which are not the result of the character's own choice. Bad books lie because they're used to manipulate us to see the world in the way the author wants us to see it, not the way the world is. And they lie because the characters become puppets or yanked around by contrived plot strings where right and wrong become fluid and subjective concepts. But good books, on the other hand, and I won't ask for names, but we can all think of a good book. Book that's gripped us, a book that's made us, that's left us wondering at our own actions, that's challenged us to re-examine our fundamental perceptions of the world. We remember the characters of good books long after we turn the last page. We talk about them, we wonder what happened to them, we enter into the stories, and we want to know why things happen the way they did. Well, I would like to suggest that not only bad books lie, I would like to suggest that bad photographs lie. And so do bad movies. And so does bad advertising, and so does bad TV. And those lies make a difference. It's not just funny to walk away and think, ha, 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 because the way those lies enter into our perception of what happens changes the votes, and changes the budget allocations, and changes the jury's verdict, and changes who a law enforcement officer will arrest, and on down the line. Bad stories fly. Now, in my class at George Washington University, I have on human trafficking. I have a whole lecture about this, and I show my students some of the images I'm going to show you, and we watch film clips, and I ask them the following questions. And I'm going to ask you, as you see these, what do these tell you about? 1, the trafficked person. 2, the trafficker. 3, the crime. And 4, what can you do about it? A good story, a good picture, a good clip would bring you in. All right, well, the images that I'll show you are, and I don't have, in the interest of time, not the whole clips, and a scene from the film Taken. A scene from the CSI, and it's not the Liam Neeson, I have a set of well-developed skills, and I will hunt you down, and I will kill you. It's not that one, although it's a great one. All right, a scene from the CSI Special Victims Unit series called The Hunting Ground, in which a young woman is sold on the back pages of a fictitious magazine that we will not name. A still from a series of public service announcements produced by Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore when they had the DNA Foundation called Real Men Don't Buy Girls. And then 2 images that highlighted stories in this morning's Google search on human trafficking. One about in the rise of human trafficking in Canada, and then the need to grant immunity to victims of trafficking in Nebraska. So I'm just going to show these very quickly to you, and think about, please, who is the trafficked person, who's the trafficker, what you can do, and then we'll talk about that very briefly. So this is the scene from Taken. Is it clear? Can you see it enough? Yes, I think everybody can see it. You know, the great scene under the bed where she's calling her father the CIA operative. All right, this one it's a little bit dark, but it's the young woman who was prostituting herself. She was a single mom, and she's talking to the guy who eventually is going to take her out and try to kill her in the middle of the Central Park forest. This is Justin Timberlake. This is a hacksaw, actually, that serrated edge that you see, and he's talking about real men aren't afraid to shave close. Real men don't buy girls. This is from the cover story of a Canadian newspaper this morning, and the headline was Rise of Human Trafficking, Instances of Human Trafficking Increasing in Canada. It's not a news photo, it's a stock photo, obviously. And then here's also a photoshopped image. This is the one from the state of Nebraska, again from this morning, talking about the need to grant immunity to victims of trafficking. Now, that kind of story is an absolutely essential story to tell. The image, not so much. All right, so think for a minute. If you were to describe the world of human trafficking according to these images, which is what most of the public sees, what kind of world would it be? You would think that a victim was a certain type of person. You would have an image of a trafficker as a certain type. You would most likely think that most trafficking was about sex trafficking, and I recognize that this is the focus of Streets, but in the aggregate, trafficking for labor is by many people considered also equally important, but the images of it in the media are almost not existent. You would think that perhaps a trafficked person is somehow bad because who's tying them up, and in some places you see handcuffed. Do we understand their humanity? Do we understand how that person got to that position? Do we know the story? Do we know the challenges? Did it ever occur to us to think that maybe that person was fundamentally brave? You know, a young woman who goes all the way from Moldova to the Middle East, never having been out of her village. There's nothing bad about her. You know, my grandmother was an immigrant to this country, was put on a ship when she was 18. She was a hero. Shouldn't we treat the young women that leave countries with job offers that they don't know are false? Shouldn't we think that they're heroes? We don't. We think somehow they're unworthy. They're bad, they're flaws. So if you see these images, you would be believing a lie. You would be believing a lie about who the trafficked persons are, about how individuals become trafficked, about how they get out of trafficking situations, and you wouldn't have the faintest idea about what you could do. And that really, really irritates me because I love citizen rabble-rousing. And I think it's great. So remember, very quickly before I give it over to Peter, we talked about the role of citizen activism. Believing lies is dangerous because if you believe lies, you know, if you then decisions become skewed, because if you believe a lie, the emphasis becomes on covering sex trafficking stories. The majority of human trafficking cases that are prosecuted at the state level are sex trafficking cases, whereas, to the best of our knowledge, trafficked victims are equally divided among labor and sex. So you have an entire half of a victim population that's not receiving any attention. A lot of this is documented in a report by the Urban Institute, published in 2015, and I'm happy to provide references for people if they would like. Because if you believe these, you'll tend to think that most of the victims of trafficking are domestic minors of sex trafficking, whereas men and foreign women and foreign children and U.S. children also are trafficked persons. So you'd be neglecting a huge part of the victim pool, and they would not be benefiting from assistance or provision or care. If you believe these lies, then it's important, you would be shortchanging law enforcement and prosecution, because approximately 40% of domestic minors arrested in a human trafficking situation at the state level are initially arrested and charged. They're considered with prostitution-related offense due to the lack of understanding of who a trafficking person is. And labor trafficking cases, where identified, are turned over by the states to the federal level because states just find them too complicated to deal with. So ask for true stories. Make sure you hear true stories. Ask your elected officials for true stories. Tell true stories when you talk about trafficking. And now, let's talk about true stories. Peter, it's yours.
Well, I'm going to try to tell the truth now. As the travel editor for CBS News, let's talk about some numbers, because what Michele really was talking about, my takeaway from that is it's not about changing necessarily the laws or the penalties, it's about changing the culture that allows this to happen in the first place. Many of you may not know this, but travel and tourism is the largest industry in the world right now. It's almost 10% of global GDP. It's basically responsible for 1 out of every 10 jobs. Now, those are pretty impressive numbers. 1.2 billion people this year will cross a border. That is staggering. 130 million of them, by the way, will be Chinese, because as the middle class grows, they get a chance to do something they haven't done for years, decades, or even centuries. They're traveling, and they're traveling with a vengeance. So those numbers are impressive, but at the same time, we're talking about how many people are trafficked. And as Michele just said, it's not just about the sexual trafficking, it's about trafficking in general in terms of labor as well. And by the way, 98% of all people who are trafficked are female in terms of in the sexual areas. But here's the interesting story. It's not a question of whether they're going to be trafficked or if they're going to be trafficked, or sometimes even how. It's how is it going to be reported by guys like me. I go back to 1990. I also live in Thailand, so I could see it up close and personal. I've been going there since 1978. And you can literally see the flow, and you can see cause and effect, acts and consequences. Here's what you also see: nothing being done. And the reason why you saw nothing being done is it all gets down to the economics of it. The money is just too big. And it's basically a part of the economy. And we're not just talking about prostitution. We're talking about essentially child labor and then cross-border stuff that is just bigger than ever. The other myth is that it doesn't just happen overseas. Groups like Polaris will tell you and prove to you that there are between 14 and 17,000 people a year in your backyard, in your neighborhood, who have been trafficked and are being held against their will. I'll give you a story about how travel impacts this, because the travel industry, up until recently, and I think Michele might agree with this, has done a terrible job of not only not recognizing it, but not reacting to it, not even anticipating it. There was a flight that I was aware of and reported, a regular airplane flight from Philadelphia to Miami. It was a U.S. air flight, and I'm going to give you the chain of events. A counter agent at the check-in area was checking in a guy with a young boy. And the woman counter agent noticed that the young boy seemed a little aimless and not sure of why he was there or where he was going, didn't have any documentation that he carried on himself, noticed it, but didn't tell anybody. At the gate agent, another woman, saw the exact same thing. And the kid couldn't even, and engaged the child in conversation to the point where she determined that the kid did not know where he was going, had no idea why he was even at the airport, but didn't tell anybody. It has a happy ending. On the flight attendant noticed the exact same behaviors, and this time she did report it to the cockpit crew and said, I want this plane met when we land in Miami. And you know what? They caught the guy. What's the net result of that? For 3 years following that, organizations were trying to get the airlines to start new training programs to alert their own employees on how to spot this, how to deal with it before it got out of control. And finally, because of reports that I did and other people did, and some other organizations like Airline Ambassadors and ECPAT, we can talk about them, there are now training programs. But not just at the airlines. At Department of Homeland Security and the TSA, they actually have a program now called Blue Lightning, which you may know about, which is training their frontline personnel to do what? Have a conversation. Ask people questions that can't be answered by yes or no. You know, if I'm a homicide detective and I think you killed somebody, the last thing I'm going to ever do is say, did you kill them? Because you're going to say no and our conversation is over. But if I'm at the airport, right, and I say to you, hey, where are you going? And you can't answer that basic question, and you can't answer it with yes or no, that creates the desperate need for another conversation. But it goes beyond that. And it goes beyond that because it gets back to the economics again. When I was over in Thailand and then all throughout Asia, I was seeing the beginnings of something that's really happening now, which is great. Organizations that are started to take that chain that ends in trafficking. And by the way, travel is a huge component part of the trafficking. They've got to get them somewhere. To take that chain and break it up. And they break it up going back to where the money is, following the money and then stopping that flow, and then giving people alternatives. There's a group in Cambodia that's taking all these kids off the street who would otherwise be trafficked, either into labor or sexual exploitation, and giving them a profession within the travel industry. So, I mean, something that they can actually covet, embrace, and pursue with real economic positive consequences, giving them an economic base. However, and this is something that's still not being done enough, even though you can take sustainable initiatives at the United Nations and create, you know, initiatives and outreach, it doesn't stop the problem because you haven't dealt with the economic issues. We can talk about outreach all day long, but if you don't follow the money and deal with the money, the problem perpetuates. And that's nowhere more true than in the hotel industry. And let's talk about that. In my experience with the hotels, there's a group, I mentioned ECPAT before. You know what it stands for, right? Okay. Okay. It's basically a group designed to combat prostitution and trafficking. Yes, thank you.
Ending
Child prostitution and trafficking. And they started in 1990. And they started, by the way, in Thailand. And here's the interesting thing. If you take a look at what goes into a hotel, who are the suppliers, who are the vendors, who do they do business with, just at the hotel level alone, it's amazing how subtle the trafficking issue is, but it permeates every aspect of the hotel experience, right? Where do they get, where does the water come from? Where do the linens come from? And this is just the labor issues, where do the vegetables come from? I mean, anything that goes into that experience. And then there's another source of revenue that no hotel wants to talk to you about. And I'm not preaching here, it's just a fact. Where do hotels make a great amount of revenue from? Where? Nope. Well, yes, but porn movies in the room. That's why hotels are very, very clever for those people who want to admit, after watching one in a room, that when you get your bill, it doesn't say you watched a porn movie, it said you watched a film. If you take a look at the breakdown of revenue in terms of type of movies in the hotel, drama, comedy, kids, porn, it's like 4-to-1. So ECPAT went to the hotels and said, look, we see the chain of command here. We see the interaction between the vendors and the suppliers in the hotels, and we know where this stuff is coming from, right? We know the exploitation aspects of the pornography industry. We know about child labor in terms of clothing and food preparation and food harvesting, et cetera, et cetera. They created what they call the Code of Ethics, the Code of Behavior, and they asked hotels if they would sign it, if they would support it. And in that code, basically, we will no longer do business with any of these types of operations. Now, this started, about 8 years ago. How many hotels do you think signed it? Initially, one. It was Carlson, Carlson Hotel Group. They have Radisson and a number of brands you would recognize. Since then, and I was at a conference, about the same conference that, by the way, Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore were at when they were together, in Cairo on trafficking. This is back in 2010, so 6 years ago. And I asked all the hoteliers who were in that room, how many would sign the code? Not a single hand went up, because it was all about the revenue. And they could not sign the code because, for those of you who don't understand the way hotels really work, with the exception of independently owned hotels, how many hotels does Sheraton own? How many hotels does Marriott own? How many hotels does Hyatt? They own hardly any of them. They're management contracts. So their basic reason for being is to get, and how they get paid is on management contract fees based on the gross operating profit of the hotel. So they couldn't dictate that. They'd lose their profit. So nobody wanted to step up to the plate. Now, since then, Choice Hotels and Accor have signed. What Accor has done, and they need to give it a shout out here, they went back to the chain and they said, okay, it's not enough to talk about taking kids off the street. It's not enough to talk about taking women off the street, whether it's labor or sexual exploitation. What do we do to stop the chain? Because what are their alternatives? Where are their resources? What are their alternatives? What can they do? And what Accor just did, and we're actually going to do that as one of my television pieces in July in Thailand, is they went one step beyond. They actually built a complete school, a hospitality school in Thailand. And what's in that school? They take the kids off the street, and what do? They teach them the hotel business, the hospitality business, all the different departments of a hotel. They built in their own supply chain of personnel at this point. It's a pipeline. And giving people a profession. that takes them off the streets. They also have decided they are no longer going to do business with any of those vendors or suppliers. And have those hotels hurt in one? No, they've not hurt at all. They just went and got other suppliers and other vendors who saw the opportunity to do it without all those other terrible things. So all of you in this room, and my colleagues in the media, we have a responsibility. You have a responsibility as travelers. I'm going to presume that most of you have passports, and that I hope most of you use them. And, you think nothing of getting on a plane and going somewhere. You now have to have a level of awareness that's heightened, like the training programs at the airlines and the Department of Homeland Security, to recognize it at that level. But then it's when you get to your destination, what questions are you asking? We all talk about environment. Oh, I'm not going to have you clean my sheets or wash the bath towels because I want to save on the environment. Great. What other questions are you asking that go beyond LEED, and something that's great environmental design? Are you asking the hotels who they're doing business with? You get to vote with your wallets, and that has resonance, big time. And if they can't answer that question, then you're not staying there. And my job is not as an advocate, although it seems like I am in this room. My job is to just, as the original New York Times report was doing, is to raise the level of awareness, to do it in a way that's relevant to your lives, that you can relate it. Otherwise, it doesn't hit home. And every one of you is going to check into a hotel at some time this year, and you're going to turn the TV on. There's one point of contact. You're going to order salad in your, a salad from the hotel restaurant, an opportunity to ask a question there. Where'd the lettuce come from, right? And as more and more of you do that, it will be economically viable for the hotel. They will not have a choice whether they sign the code or not, but they will not have a choice but to do anything other than readdress their purchasing, readdress their entire philosophy, how they deal with their vendors and their suppliers. Because if they don't do that, the problem just perpetuates, because at the end of the day, it's all about the money. And these guys, hotels are run by accountants who look at P&Ls. That's all they do, P&L, profit and loss. They want to know what each department is generating. So you need to let them know they have to find other sources of generating that revenue, or you're not staying there and they've now lost your revenue. And it really does work. And the ECPAT guys have done a great job of this. Still, an overwhelming majority of those hotels have not signed the code. They still need to be educated. It's no different than, when you take a look at, and Michele talked about this, when this problem first came to light, the only people who were talking about it were the people who knew about it, and it was a vicious circle because it wasn't getting it out. Now the word is getting out. And it's not just guys like me, it's guys like you, right? We all are citizen journalists in this room. You all have a cell phone. Some of you might even call it a smartphone, which, by the way, doesn't make you smart. But you have an opportunity to post it. You have an opportunity to be responsible in that way. And the more that happens, what we're seeing in commerce these days, whether it's an airline, a hotel, a cruise line, a rental car company, they now monitor social media, voraciously. They cannot stop, right? They want to know what you're thinking, all right? Well, go, let them know what you're thinking. Ask those questions. And when you find a hotel that is responsible, shout them out too, because somebody has to lead by example in a positive way, like Accor is doing. We're going over there to celebrate what they're doing, because I think people need to know that there's a way around this that actually gives them a better life and a more sustainable life, because they now have a career, they have an economic base, and all those other people who didn't think they have choices now do. And so that's the kind of stories that we're doing. And you know how much we've accomplished? This much. This much. Because most people, most of your friends, have no idea that the trafficking is in Mendota. The trafficking is in Middleton. The trafficking is in Rockford. It's not just in Bangkok. And until we get that word out, people are going to essentially delude themselves into thinking it's not their problem. because it is their problem. You ask kids where food comes from today, they tell you the store. No, it doesn't. Right? You focus on the process, and then you can deal with the product. And the process right now has to be changed. Thanks.